Hello, welcome to the Gothic Literary Society. I'm Charlotte Leisman. This is a YouTube channel devoted to literature and writing. Most of my examples do come from the Gothic genre or from horror and dark fantasy, but we talk about a lot of things that are related to writing and the craft of writing in general. So, a little bit about me before we get started. So, I fell in love with the Gothic genre around middle school when I read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And at the time, I didn't even know it was Gothic, but all I knew is I loved it. And then throughout the years, I discovered that most of what I loved was Gothic or horror. And horror came into play when my best friend and I discovered Stephen King and Dean Koontz and John Saul. So we read a lot of that growing up. I was a unique child. So over the years, what I've discovered is that there are not a whole lot of resources for those of us who love, or especially those of us who write Gothic literature. And a lot of the resources that I've found are websites that talk a whole lot about the Gothic tropes. So, for instance, things like decrepit old houses or isolation and desolate landscapes and family secrets and things like that. But that's about as deep as they go. And what I've discovered after reading this genre for so long is that's really not the summation of what makes a book Gothic. Those tropes are actually in there to support Gothic themes. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like there are a whole lot of people talking about what a Gothic theme really looks like or what makes a book Gothic and why those tropes are there in the first place and how they support those themes. So I thought to myself, why don't I just start my own YouTube channel for those of us who do love Gothic literature? And so here we are, and this is what we're doing on this channel. So some of the things we talk about on this channel are things that I call Gothic or writing educational videos, where we talk about things like how to suspend tension. So say you have a pivotal scene, there's something cataclysmic that's happening, and it's something that's not going to take place very quickly. It might feel quick from your character's perspective, but from the reader's perspective, it might go on for 10 or 20 or even 50 pages, depending on how large your book is and how important the scene is. And what you don't want is to lose your characters. You want to maintain that tension and you want them on the edge of their seats from start to finish. So how do you do that? And I can think of an example in which this was not done very well. And I can think of several examples when writers have actually done this very, very well. And one example in particular, it features one character with a lengthy suspended tension, and for another writer, it's a multitude of characters, and the tension is suspended for a long period of time. And so we're going to talk about things like that, and we'll talk about things, for instance, like terror versus horror. This is not explicitly a Gothic thing, but in the Gothic genre, if you are familiar with Gothic writing, you'll know that terror is more traditionally Gothic than horror is, but that's not to say that horror doesn't have a place. And these days there's been a bit of crossover between the two. And so we'll talk about when you would use terror versus horror, why would you choose one or the other, and how is it more effective to do that? Or we'll talk about things, for instance, like the helpless heroine. So helpless heroines, as you know, do not always go over very well with modern readers. But a helpless heroine is a traditional Gothic trope, and it is important. There are many times when in a Gothic novel or even horror or fantasy, or I could see it in any number of settings, say mystery, you would want a helpless character, male or female, and you want that character to be sympathizable, you want him or her to be relatable to the readers, but you don't want them to be irritated. So we'll talk about things like how to accomplish that, how to make that character sympathizable and not annoying, because I think we can all think of an example or two when a character has been helpless and not so relatable. 1 or 2 videos every month will feature topics like those, things that are what I would call Gothic or just writing education in general. And then the middle of every month, we're going to feature something I call Gothic lore. So that's basically an umbrella phrase meant to catch all those things that are perhaps Gothic or marketed as Gothic, but they aren't explicitly Gothic novels. So they might be Gothic short stories or poems. Say Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. We'll talk about Gothic movies like The Crow, The Lost Boys, Red Riding Hood, things like those. We're going to dive into book reviews as well. So every month we will get into at least one Gothic novel, and some of those novels will be more traditional Gothic novels, say Wuthering Heights or Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and we will talk about what makes them Gothic and what tropes the author has used to support the theme, what is the theme, and what we can take away from it. And then we'll deal with some of the more what I would call mid-range Gothic novels, those that kind of fall in the middle of the timeline. So things from perhaps the middle to the late 20th century, some of Shirley Jackson's writing, or Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, and things like that. And then we'll also talk about more contemporary writing like Mexican Gothic. So anything that's labeled Gothic, a Gothic novel, we will cover at some point during the book review session. And then the last week of the month, in honor of the 31st, even though there may not be a 31st, we will do something I call Horror Dark Fantasy Night, when we will take a look at something that is marketed as a horror or dark fantasy writing, and we will examine whether it's truly explicitly horror or whether we think it's perhaps a crossover between Gothic and horror. And regardless of which it is, why is that the case? Like, how is it similar or dissimilar from the Gothic genre, and what can we take away from that? How can we understand this better? So my hope for this channel is basically, number one, that we all have a greater appreciation for the Gothic genre, that we enjoy it more and understand it more. And secondly, that those of us who write Gothic literature, or horror for that matter, that we will have the resources to be able to write better quality Gothic writing. And third, that we all just have a really good time. So this is meant to be a community. So feel free on all the videos to comment below, because that's the point, is for all of us to get together and talk and learn together and just enjoy all of the Gothic writing that's out there and what we love so much about it. So subscribe below. I post videos every Friday, and stay tuned because there's lots more where that came from.